Good morning. It is July 4th, 2022. Izzy and I wanted to talk a little bit about the 4th of July and what it's all about and what it means to us. And I guess just comment a little bit about how the country is dealing with various issues that are going on right now and what have you. So, Izzy, you want to kick it off or you want me to start?
Oh, you were going to give a little history lesson, no?
Well, my history lesson is well, it's interesting, and so
I thought it was fascinating. So I think it touched on information that maybe the regular average Joe and Jane doesn't know. So
a couple of things about the 4th of July. First of all, most people tend to look at the 4th of July as the birth of our nation, as the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
No, they don't. They look at it as fireworks and barbecues.
Well, they look at it as fireworks and barbecues. I suppose that's also true. So you're right. Most people who know better think about it as the birth of our nation. At least I was taught that in school. I don't know that they teach that in school anymore. But actually, the truth is really, there's a lot of history that goes back before the 4th of July, 1776. The real issue started in 1756, which was 20 years before, at the beginning of what they called the 7 Years' War, which we refer to as the French and Indian War, which I don't know if it's PC to say French and Indian, but this is history, so we can say that. So French and Indian War, basically, what ends up happening is the British monarchy uses the colonial militia to fight the French and take over more land in North America, going more toward the west of the original 13 colonies. And this was done in part by British troops and in part by the colonial militia. The whole thing actually started, interestingly, when the French had some troops here that came down from Canada, and they were building a fort in Pennsylvania. And at the time, then Major George Washington of the colonial militia and a bunch of his guys kicked them out of there. He killed a whole bunch of French troops. He burned their fort, and he basically threw them out. And that sort of sparked the French and Indian War. But anyway,
you mentioned something that was fascinating. How old was GW back then?
So he was about 30 at that time. No, he was even younger than that. He was in
younger.
Yeah, he was in his late 20s, and he was a major in the colonial militia, and this guy was a real ass kicker. So anyway, after the French and Indian War is over, the king says to the colonials, "Look, I want all of this land, and you can have it, but you got to pay tax on it." Right, to generate revenue. And he had to generate a lot of, he had to generate revenue in other ways because it was an extremely expensive war. So one of the ways they did was with the Stamp Act in 1765, where they started basically anything that you sold. If you sold a deck of cards, tobacco, all kinds of like consumables and whatever, there was a stamp on it that showed that there was tax, like now on liquor and on cigarettes and things like that. But at the time, I guess they didn't have pre-rolled cigarettes. So when you bought tobacco, there was a tax, there's tax on it, and a bunch of other things. And then that got repealed because the people were so annoyed by it that basically they protested and ended up going away. But then there were the Townsend Acts, and then the Tea Act, which led to the Boston Tea Party. And whatever. And it just kept building, but that's not really what triggered everything. Even the Boston Massacre is not what triggered everything. What triggered everything, so first of all, everybody knows, no taxation without representation, that the colonials were upset because, in their minds, they said, look, we're willing to pay some tax. We understand if the government gives us something, we're willing to pay tax, it's fine. And they were used to paying tax. But the fact that they had no say in where the tax came from, how much it was going to be, how it was calculated, what it was on, etc., it was no taxation without representation. The other problem was that after the French and Indian War, the British wanted to disarm the colonials. They wanted to take away their guns. And they said, look, we'll hold on to your arms and your powder, right? And we'll keep it safe for you. And if we need you to fight for us, we'll give you your guns back so you can fight. It's just like what happened in Ukraine, right? They passed out guns to the civilians. The civilians are fighting the Russians. And trust me, they're going to take those guns back away from the civilians when they're done, if the Ukrainians survive this. But whatever, I'm digressing. I don't mean to do that. But the point is that that's ridiculous, right? And gun control is really, really what started it, because less than a year before July 4th, 1776, on July 6th, 1775, the Declaration, I got to read this because I don't remember, the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms was written and published by, I think, Thomas Jefferson and one other guy. And it basically was an indictment of the British and an explanation to the world saying, look, this is why we're not going to give up our guns. All right, this is why we need guns. The people need guns. And that's really what led up to the ultimately to the Declaration of Independence, where and if you think about the Declaration of Independence also, I don't know how many people really read the Declaration of Independence. It's not modern English, obviously. It's a little difficult to understand it in some points, but it's an absolutely scathing rebuke of the King of England at the time by a bunch of guys who were in their 20s and 30s. All right, and if you think about it for a minute, these guys, the British had troops here in the colonies. All right, one of the things that they were pissed off about is that he was quartering their troops. The king was quartering troops in private people's homes. You had to put up soldiers. Too bad. Okay, that's one of the amendments in the Constitution is no quartering of troops. Right, you don't get to do that kind of stuff. So that was one thing that the people were angry about. But the fact of the matter is, they were angry that they didn't want to be subjects. They were here. They were in the colonies for freedom. All right. And now basically what you do is when you take the arms away from people, you make them subjects. And in America, we're citizens. We're not subjects. All right. And we're not going to be subjects again, ever. And that's one of the things that people don't realize. That was the basis of the starting of this country. All right. The idea of freedom and being able to protect yourself against the government, all right, the tyranny of the government. And that's kind of what's happening in New York right now, because now we have, the Supreme Court finally, there's, and I don't mean to make a political statement about this. This is American history and this is American jurisprudence.
We're linking this. We're talking about Independence Day. Today is July 4th.
Correct.
Right? So it's the birth of our country, and there's significance to your reference to the Supreme Court. Go ahead.
It's freedom. The Supreme Court is one of the three branches of our legislature, right? Rather of our government, and the Supreme Court is what they're doing right now. Is they're simply righting the wrongs that have been in effect for the last 50, 60, 70, or 100 years, depending on the cases that they're deciding right now. And basically what they're doing is they're just resetting the clock back to original intent of what's in the Constitution. The Constitution covers certain things. Anything that isn't in the Constitution goes to the individual states. The Second Amendment it's the Second Amendment. It's right after the first. Okay, and it says it's the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And this relates to us in the security business, especially because obviously, guns are part of our business, but we welcome civilians, responsible civilians, law-abiding civilians to be armed because it makes our life a lot easier. All right, if criminals thought that walking into a place where people gather, that the people are ready to start shooting back at them, guess what? They're not going to go there. All right? Criminals go to places that are gun-free zones. Why do they go to schools? Why do they go to supermarkets? Why do they go to movie theaters? Because you're not allowed to bring a gun there. So what do? They don't care that you're not allowed to bring a gun there. They bring a gun there and they start shooting people who aren't armed. And unfortunately, here in the People's Republic of New Yorkistan, the individual rights are not recognized at all, at all. All right. And, this is what's happening here. I'm going to pass that over to you.
Yeah, so I would like to build on what you're saying. I think it's no coincidence that the Supreme Court decisions, which is getting a lot of press, has garnered a lot of reaction across the country, that it coincides in close proximity to July 4th and Independence Day. If we've seen anything over the last couple of years, it's how the government has taken away power from the people. With COVID, a new administration, lockdowns, vaccinations, mandates, requirements, staying at home. The government has expanded its power steadily, and the people have lost power incrementally at lightning speed. And these decisions, if nothing else, without getting into the politics, it really doesn't make a difference if what side of the aisle you're on, or how you feel about these particular issues. The nice thing about the United States of America is everybody's entitled to an opinion. However, this goes back to the founding fathers and the foundation stones that this country was built on, and that is power to the people. If there's one shining moment in these decisions, it's the Supreme Court finally saying, after years of a loss of power, is we are taking power away from the federal government, power that we feel is unconstitutional, and we're giving it back to the people. And we're not saying that you can or can't do certain things. We're saying the states are going to be tasked with making these decisions, and you, people of the United States of America, citizens who elect local politicians, have a say in the rules and regulations of your particular state. So if you have a certain feeling about a particular issue, then vote the people into office that can make legislation, that can enact rules and regulations that support that policy, and majority rules. It doesn't mean that the minority doesn't have a say in the matter. It doesn't mean that their views are not accepted. It just means that the majority rules. And that's what the Constitution is all about. That's what this country is. And that goes back to representation, or taxation with representation, or for the people, by the people. The people need a say in things. And when you take those rights away, those fundamental rights guaranteed by our Constitution, you have problems. If you look at what's going on in the last year plus 2 years, you'd have to be blind and dumb to say that there hasn't been a complete upheaval in this country. This country hasn't changed, not just locally, but on the global scale. And finally, the Supreme Court has done something for the regular person to feel like our time is coming where we can start taking back power, lessening government incrementally on some really important issues and topics. And I love that this happened around Independence Day. I love that there's a correlation to a day of independence. I was mentioning to you, Dave, before we started recording this, you see all this stuff popping up on social media, whether you know people or don't. It's a very divisive time in our country, and I think perhaps reminisce of the time of colonialism, when we had the colonies and the British were here. I will go off a tangent for a little bit. You had mentioned Ukraine. I would say the one difference about Ukraine and here is, in Ukraine, the citizens of Ukraine are fighting for their country. And during colonialism, the British wanted to, make rules and regulations as it pertained to the colonists that favored British rule overseas in a different continent. Yet they wanted to use local people, the local colonists, to promote their agenda. So there was a difference there. And when Britain wanted to take away arms and de-arm the colonists, that was a big deal for them. And there's a slight deviation, a slight difference there. In Ukraine, they're fighting for their survival of their country, and here, back in the 1770s, we were fighting for British interests and not America's interests, because there was no America yet. And that was the point of the Revolutionary Wars. It was time to look inward instead of looking outward. And now I lost my train of thought. But so I think that it's really cool. Oh, I was saying on social media, you see sort of the chatter, and it's a very divisive time. And that divisive time is reminiscent to me of what must have been going on in the times of the colonies under British rule. There was probably divisiveness there as well. And it got to a point where people were fed up and they had to take action. Then you had the Revolutionary War. Today, the revolt is internal, right? There's no foreign government for us to revolt against. It's our own government. I'm not suggesting that we revolt. I'm suggesting that the Supreme Court is our last bastion of independence, of power, that is finally looks like it might be the impetus and the beginning of starting to turn the tides just a little bit. And hopefully, with these decisions, once they become implemented, even before they become implemented, now that they've been made public, and it's getting people to think, and hopefully empowering people and emboldening people to say, okay, I'm not alone here. And although the government doesn't seem to be aligned with my interests, there is an entity in separation of state. We have another branch of government, like you said, that is taking decisive action to hopefully start giving back power to the people and making a difference. And maybe we'll start to gain a little bit momentum and see a shift, a paradigm shift in the state of our union, in the state of our country. And if it started on Independence Day, wow, what a beautiful coincidence, and what an amazing way to celebrate. And that reminds me, I got a text from a friend of mine who I value my friendship with this person. And they text me and said, I don't feel like this country deserves a celebration this year. And I was totally blown away and mystified. I'm like,
this is a lawyer, by the way, right?
A lawyer, yes, a lawyer, a very educated lawyer from a red state originally, but relocated here to the East Coast for decades now. And I was shocked because, politics aside, feelings about whatever raging issues are going on in this country right now, absent the Revolutionary War, you and I would not be having this conversation right now. We wouldn't even be able to discuss two different philosophies and two different ideologies. We'd be under a tyrannical rule of a monarchy, if you will. Life would be certainly different. And the fact that we can have these conversations and the fact that we don't have to agree on anything doesn't make us enemies. That's part of freedom. It's part of living here in America. And that is something to be celebrated, regardless of the fact that you think one thing and I think something else. We live in a society where both of those opinions have value, and both of those opinions contribute to this society, contribute to the freedoms of this country, and is what makes this country great. Why shouldn't that be celebrated? So, I can't wrap my head around it.
So I just wanted to touch on what you said. You said, earlier you referred to the United States as a union. And if you think about it for a minute, most people don't realize the United States really isn't a country. It's a constitutional republic made up of 50 smaller countries called states. Anything that isn't in the Constitution is reserved to the states, right? The states decide. If you live somewhere in these United States and you don't like the local government, you're welcome to pick up and move next door to a state that is, more in line with your thinking. It's no problem. So the whole point is that if it's in here, everybody is the same. If it's not in here, you get to decide locally what you want to do. That's all that it says. And the other thing is people don't, they very quickly forget the Constitution doesn't give us rights. The Constitution guarantees that the government can't take away the rights that we already have, okay, that are given to us by God. All right. All of the things that are in the Constitution, people already have those rights. Some of them might have been recognized later than others. All right. And that's true. And there's certainly things that happened in the founding of this country and in the early, days of the country, which were not good. All right. And which wasn't my fault and wasn't Izzy's fault. So, but now today, the United States is a fantastic place to live. And all you have to do is ask the millions of people who try to come into the United States every single year, right? If this was such a horrible place, why are people dying to get in here, literally? So that's something to think about on the 4th of July. All right. If you're here and you're an American, don't you be happy? All right. And be a little.
And if you're here and you're not an American, you should be happy.
Be happy.
Right?
Yeah, that you're not being thrown out. So
and that you're not living in a foreign country where civilians have to be given arms and relying, exclusively on foreign aid for military weaponry to defend yourselves, and your cities are getting obliterated, and nobody's stepping in to help you. Or like Chicago.
In any event, that's what the 4th of July is about, I suppose. And this year, it's a little bit crazy in this country, but I hadn't thought about it until you mention it now. But now that you mention it, I think that you're right. I think the fact that all these decisions came out right before Independence Day, I think it's something to definitely reflect on. I mean, these decisions give us freedom. I understand people think that the reversal of, I'm not going to start talking about the ideology or whatever. I understand people think that the reversal of Roe v. Wade takes away freedom. It actually doesn't. It actually gives freedom. It gives individual freedom to the individual states to decide on their own what they want for that specific situation, and plenty of others. All right. Again, if it's not in the Constitution, it's up to the individual states. That's all that this is, that's going on. And that's all that the Supreme Court is saying. And that they're simply setting right mistakes that were made by liberal courts in the past that should never have been made to begin with. And that's basically it.
Yeah, I want to just add one thing to that. And that is, I think a good way to show appreciation, at least for myself. I know when I appreciate something, I convey that appreciation to whomever I'm with. If I go, let's just use an example. I went to Starbucks and I ordered a coffee or whatever it is. When I get it, I say thank you. If I'm at the checkout in the supermarket, I want to make it a point of saying thank you to the checkout clerk. Those little acts of kindness go a long way. They're doing a job that maybe might seem mundane, but it's a necessary job, and giving them the time of day, respect, and thanks goes a long way. On Independence Day, I think it's important for us to start having some appreciation for our law enforcement, for our military, especially for our first responders. Again, with the decline of the individual power, there's been a divisiveness and a charging of emotion when it comes to law enforcement, and it makes their job and our lives incredibly difficult. I've worked law enforcement. I've seen good people in law enforcement and bad people in law enforcement, like any other profession. I've gone to the gym and I've had good instructors and I've had bad instructors. I've taken my car to the mechanic and had mechanics that I felt did me right, and I've had mechanics that I think took me for a ride. It's in every facet and aspect of life that you're going to have good and bad. The fact that the bad gets highlighted to such a degree that negates any and all goodness associated to a thankless job for people that, despite how charged this country has gotten as it pertains to law enforcement, first responders, the military, we're still calling 911 in an emergency. We're still expecting there to be a response. We're still criticizing people if we don't get the response that we want. So maybe take a moment and thank a first responder, thank somebody in law enforcement. Right before this, we delayed starting this video because I had to go ride my bike somewhere and deliver something to somebody. And I was riding on the boardwalk in Long Beach, New York. There's a 4K run today because of Independence Day. And there were police officers riding their bicycles up and down the boardwalk, escorting the runners. And I made a point, every police officer that I passed on a bicycle, I said, "Happy Independence Day. Thank you for your service." And they paused and it got a smile. And I hope it made them feel good. I know it made me feel good. And it cost me nothing. And I go home and I go about my day. These are random acts of kindness, random acts of goodness. It doesn't cost you anything. It can make all the difference. And if perchance you get into contact with law enforcement, maybe you blow a stop sign once or a red light, maybe you get lucky. And the police officer that you showed kindness to is the police officer that's pulling you over. Maybe you get a pass. Maybe you get a pass because of random acts of kindness. If you give it a shot, I guarantee you it'll pay itself off in dividends. If you need people to come to your aid, you want to have a good relationship with them. And it starts with you. It shouldn't start with them. So show them a little courtesy, show them a little respect. Remember, it's Independence Day. Remember, it was volunteers who took up arms and went to battle to guarantee that we have the rights and the freedom and the security that we have today. And that doesn't come for free. So be a little appreciative.
Don't forget, it's still volunteers. Everybody serving in the military today is a volunteer. Nobody got drafted. They're all there because they chose to be there. All right. So
exactly.
Think about that. And I understand that maybe some people aren't necessarily proud to be Americans today. That's your business. Be thankful that you're an American, okay? Because you could be a woman living in Yemen. Think about that. So happy Independence Day.
Happy Independence Day. And thank you. Like and subscribe.